Did you know that there are easily accessible video games out there that can make kids addicted to gambling? That there are games out there where you can spend real life money on for digital goods that don't really hold real monetary value? I have been playing video games for most of my life, and I've experienced a lot of different business practices done by these video game companies. And today I'll be informing you about one of them and the dangers of loot boxes and microtransactions. Now, today I'll be covering 3 to 4 things in this video. I'll be covering what are loot boxes and microtransactions, and why do companies utilize them, the dangers of these things, and can these things be healthy for video games? Now, to kick it off, what are loot boxes and microtransactions? Now, microtransactions is a term used in the gaming community where you spend real life money on in a video game. And loot box is a form of microtransaction. The reason I want to specify loot box because they have a negative stigma in the community is because how it works, loot box gives the player a random item. And what video game companies do, they put like a desirable items in these said loot boxes, which means players have to spend real life money to have a chance to get these items, not even a guaranteed one. Now, before we move on to that second one, why companies utilize these, it's important I tell you how the system works in the gaming industry. Now, you get a group of game developers who have an idea of what their game wants but don't have the resources to do so. So they make a contract and partner up with a bigger company that has a lot of money, like EA Games. And the problem is that usually in the contract, the developers don't have a say how they sell their video game or how they monetize it. Is usually up to the higher up companies like EA. Now, to move on to our second point, why do companies use these things? It's basically money. These loot boxes make way too much money. There are cases where kids spend like over £10,000 in a span of like 2 hours. It got so bad to the point where the UK Parliament had to get involved and to have a hearing. And the UK Parliament questioned EA Games. The reason why I want to emphasize EA Games here because EA has a bad stigma in the gaming community. Is because EA is known for using very greedy and scummy business practices in their video games. Now, before we move on to the dangers of these games, I want to talk about why, I want to reference a person named Angry Joe. And the reason I want to mention him because he makes a good point and like a good idea why loot boxes are very dangerous. And the reason why they're dangerous is because they're very manipulative and they're very, predatory towards kids. The reason why I say that is because there's a lot of companies like EA who make games whose target audience are kids and put loot boxes there and try to entice them to spend real life money on them, and it's usually their parents. And Angry Joe makes a point how these things are very predatory and very manipulative towards kids that try and entice them to spend a lot of money on them. Now, when we move on to our last point, which is, can video games be healthy? Short answer is loot boxes cannot be healthy for video games. It's just not. And I'm going to reference the Act Man, who made a wonderful video about this. Loot boxes are now a liability for video game companies now. It's because an EA game called Star Wars Battlefront 2 made it to where players can spend real life money on a chance to get better armor or like a lightsaber or better blasters than the other players. Cause that's kind of ridiculous, to be honest. Players, you already spent $60 on this game, yet the company EA wants you to spend money on loot boxes for a chance to get better weapons and gear. Now, this game Battlefront 2 faced a ton of backlash and got boycotted, and EA had to rework the entire game. But this game showed that gamers are now are tired of these really greedy business practices and are willing to stand up and boycott games, which is now why video game companies are straying away from them due to how bad the PR can get for these games. Because Battlefront showed that companies are willing to give the player an unfinished, not playable product but still have a functional like loot box system where you can spend real life money on. Now, to summarize what we talked about here, we talked about what are loot boxes and microtransactions, and why companies use them, why they're dangerous, and are they healthy for the game. Now, to send it off before the video ends, loot boxes will probably not gonna appear as much, but microtransactions, on the other hand, will still be here. And the reason why is because video games are getting more and more expensive to create, and companies need to find ways to make more money for them. But but with the Battlefront situation I just mentioned with the Star Wars game, video game companies will now have to think of more creative and intuitive ways to make microtransactions that makes them money while also making the players happy. Because that scenario show that people are willing to boycott or stand up against video game companies who make greedy practices like loot boxes and put them in their game. Now, that's all I have today. I hope you learned anything new, and I hope you have a good day. Bye now.